Here's the Perel move. She never opens with the villain, she opens with the relationship you didn't know you were in. So instead of naming the food, name the trust. Something like, you don't fall for the things you're suspicious of. You fall for the things that feel safe. The granola bar in your kid's lunchbox. The yogurt you picked because it said protein on the front. The bread you never once questioned because bread has been on your table your whole life. Quietly, reliably, like family. That's not an accident. That's design. The food that's hurting Americans most isn't hiding in the aisle you're wary of. It's hiding in the aisle where your guard is down completely. That's the hook. Reframe it as a betrayal of intimacy, not a nutrition fact. The number one food doctors are worried about isn't the one you're suspicious of. It's the one you never thought to question. It works because it borrows Perel's signature move, is turning a factual reveal into an emotional one. Viewers click not because they want a nutrition list, but because they want to know which safe thing in their life has actually been working against them. I want to start with a confession, not from me, but from you. Somewhere in your kitchen right now, not the pantry you're suspicious of, not the junk food you already feel guilty about, but somewhere in the food you trust. There is something doctors have been trying to warn you about for years, and the reason it's still there, the reason it's still on your table tonight, is that it doesn't look like a threat. It looks like breakfast. It looks like a snack you handed your kid on the way out the door. It looks like the healthy choice you made on purpose standing in that aisle trying to do right by your family. That's what makes this different from every other health scare you've heard about. This isn't hiding in the food you already avoid. It's hiding in the food you reach for specifically because you trust it. And that trust, quiet, automatic, built over years of clever packaging and reassuring language, is exactly what's being used against you. Doctors have a name for it now. Researchers have spent years mapping exactly how it was engineered, who funded the studies telling you not to worry, and why your own body's hunger signals no longer seem to work the way they used to. And once you see how deliberate this actually was, you will never look at your own kitchen the same way again. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly what this food is, why it was built this way, and more importantly, exactly how to take your plate and your family's health back into your own hands. This isn't about fear, it's about finally seeing clearly. Let's begin. I want to start with a number, and I want you to really sit with it because I don't think most people have any idea how big this actually is. More than half of the calories the average American eats today come from a category of food that didn't meaningfully exist 100 years ago. Not sugar, not fat, not carbs, a category. Ultra-processed food. And here's the part that should stop you cold. Most of you eating it right now don't think of yourselves as eating processed food at all. You think you're eating breakfast. You think you're eating a snack. You think you're feeding your kids lunch. Nobody wakes up and says, today I'm going to eat mostly industrially formulated substances. And yet that is precisely what's happening at scale to almost this entire country. So let's be clear about what we're actually talking about, because processed isn't the right word, and it never was. Cutting vegetables is processing. Freezing fruit is processing. What we're talking about is something categorically different. Food built from ingredients you would never find in a home kitchen. Modified starches, isolated proteins, emulsifiers, flavor compounds engineered in a lab to replicate a taste that used to come from an actual plant or animal. This isn't food that's been altered. This is food that's been assembled from parts the way you'd assemble a car, except instead of an engine and a chassis, you're assembling something to eat using ingredients selected not for nutrition, but for shelf life, mouthfeel, and how hard it is to stop eating it. And this didn't happen by accident, and it didn't happen overnight. It happened gradually, one grocery store aisle at a time, one convenient dinner at a time, until it simply became the water we're all swimming in. Your grandparents' kitchen had ingredients: flour, butter, eggs, vegetables, things you could point to and say, I know what that is, I know where it came from. Walk into a kitchen today and check the pantry, check the labels. You'll find ingredient lists 20, 30 items long, half of them unpronounceable, most of them serving a manufacturing purpose that has nothing to do with your health and everything to do with the company's bottom line. Here's why I need you to actually absorb this point before we go any further today, because everything else we're going to talk about builds on it. This isn't about any single food. It's not about one villain you can simply cut out and call it solved. If this were just about sugar or just about one bad ingredient, we would have fixed this decades ago. This is about an entire category of food that has quietly become the default. Default breakfast, default lunch, default dinner, default snack. When something becomes the default, you stop questioning it. You stop noticing it. It just becomes what eating looks like. And that is exactly the problem, because your body was never built for a food supply like this one. Your metabolism, your gut, your hormones, they evolved over hundreds of thousands of years dealing with food that came from the ground or from an animal. They did not evolve to process a landscape where the majority of what crosses your plate was designed in a lab, tested for palatability in a focus group, and optimized to make you buy more of it. That mismatch between what your body expects and what you're actually feeding it is not a minor detail. It is, I would argue, the single biggest unaddressed driver of chronic disease in this country today. So before we talk about why it's built to be impossible to stop eating, before before we talk about who's funding the research telling you it's fine, I need this one fact to land first. This isn't a story about a few bad choices at the grocery store. This is a story about an entire food category that took over your plate so gradually you never got the chance to say no. You didn't choose this. It was built around you. And the first step to taking your health back is finally seeing it for what it is. Now let's talk about why you can't just eat one. You felt this. Everyone in this room has felt this. You open a bag of chips telling yourself you'll have a handful, and 40 minutes later you're staring into an empty bag wondering what happened. And here's what I need you to understand. That's not a failure of your discipline. That is a food engineered in a very literal, very deliberate sense to make that exact outcome happen. There's a term for this, and once you learn it, you will never look at a snack aisle the same way again. Hyperpalatability. It's not a marketing word, it's a formulation strategy. Food scientists have spent decades identifying the precise combinations of fat, sugar, and salt that hit your brain's reward system harder than any of those ingredients would on their own. Not sugar alone, not fat alone, together in very specific ratios, engineered and tested and refined the way a chemist would refine a formula, because that's exactly what's happening. There are labs, there are focus groups, there is a measurable science to identifying what food scientists themselves sometimes call the bliss point, the precise level of sweetness or fat or salt that maximizes your desire to keep eating without ever quite tipping into feeling like too much. Here's the part that should really bother you. This isn't about making food taste good. Making food taste good is normal. Your grandmother did that. Every good cook in history has done that. This is about something else entirely. This is about deliberately overriding the biological systems that are supposed to tell you when to stop. Your body has a whole set of signals, hormonal and neurological, built to say, that's enough, you're satisfied, put the fork down. Hyperpalatable food is specifically engineered to blunt those signals. It's built to keep the reward system firing past the point where a plate of real food would have already told you to stop. And this is exactly why willpower fails here in a way it doesn't with ordinary food. Nobody accidentally overeats a bowl of steamed vegetables. Nobody finds themselves helplessly polishing off a second serving of grilled chicken they didn't even want. But hand someone a bag of something engineered to hit that exact combination of crunch, salt, fat, and sugar, and it becomes a different game entirely, because you are no longer just making a food choice. You are going up against a product that was tested, reformulated, and optimized sometimes over years, specifically to beat your body's own stop signal. That's not a fair fight, and it was never supposed to be. Think about what that actually means for how you've been talking to yourself. How many of you have stood in your kitchen embarrassed, telling yourself you have no self-control, after finishing something that was quite literally designed by trained professionals to make finishing it feel almost automatic? That's not a personal failing. That is the product working exactly as intended. The shame you've been carrying belongs somewhere else entirely. It belongs with the engineering, not with you. And once you see it this way, it connects directly to everything we talked about with sugar and dopamine and insulin. This is the delivery mechanism. This is how an entire category of food took over the American plate so completely, so quietly, not because people suddenly lost the ability to control themselves, but because the food itself changed, became more engineered, more optimized, more precisely calibrated to be eaten in quantities your body was never designed to handle. You didn't get weaker, the food got stronger. So here's what I want you to walk away with from this part of the conversation. The next time you find yourself unable to stop at just a handful, I don't want you reaching for shame. I want you reaching for the label. Read what's actually in there, because what you're fighting isn't a lack of character. It's a formula built by people whose job was to make sure you couldn't stop. And once you know that, you can finally stop blaming yourself for losing a fight that was never fair to begin with. Now I want to go a layer deeper, because understanding that this food is engineered to be hard to stop eating is only half the story. The other half is even stranger and honestly even more unsettling. Your body isn't just losing the willpower fight. In a lot of very real, measurable ways, your body doesn't even recognize what you're eating as food in the first place. Let me explain what I mean by that. Digestion is not a passive process. When you eat something whole, an apple, a piece of meat, a handful of nuts, your gut has to work. It has to break down fiber, unlock nutrients from cells, physically process structure that took real effort to break apart. That process isn't just mechanical, it's informational. Your gut is sending signals the entire time back to your brain, back to your hormones, telling your body what's coming in, how much and when to start feeling satisfied. Ultra-processed food skips almost all of that. It's already broken down before it ever reaches your mouth. Pre-digested, in a sense, by the manufacturing process itself, which means it hits your bloodstream faster, it hits your brain faster, faster, and critically, it skips right past a huge number of the signals your body relies on to know when to stop. This is why you can sit down with a family-sized bag of something ultra-processed and put away far more calories far more quickly than you ever could with real food, and still 20 minutes later feel like you could keep going. Try doing that with a plate of roasted vegetables and grilled fish. You physically can't. Your body stops you. It sends the signals, you feel full, you're done. But strip the fiber out, isolate the starches, engineer the texture so it barely requires chewing, and you've removed nearly every natural break your body has. You're not just eating faster, you're eating past the point where your body would normally have told you to stop, because the system that's supposed to tell you that was never given the chance to activate. And this ties directly into what we already talked about with insulin and dopamine, because it compounds. You get the rapid glucose spike because there's no fiber slowing anything down. You get the insulin surge trying to catch up. You get the dopamine hit calibrated by design to make you want more. And underneath all of it, your gut isn't sending the fullness signals it's supposed to send because the food never asked it to work in the first place. Every single mechanism your body has for regulating intake, mechanical, hormonal, neurological, gets undermined at the same time by the same category of food. That's not one weak link. That's the entire chain, compromised simultaneously. Here's what really gets me every time I explain this to a room full of people. We've been trained to think of overeating as a simple equation. Too many calories in, not enough burned off, end of story. But that framing completely ignores the fact that a calorie from a whole structurally intact food and a calorie from an ultra-processed one do not behave the same way once they're inside you. They're not interchangeable. One works with your body's regulatory systems. The other bypasses them almost entirely. So when someone says a calorie is a calorie, I want you to remember this moment, because that idea, however tidy it sounds, simply does not hold up against what we now know is actually happening inside a human gut. And this is why so many people feel like their hunger has become unreliable, like it doesn't shut off the way it used to, like they can eat a full meal and still feel like something's missing 20 minutes later. That's not you being broken. That is a predictable, measurable consequence of feeding a highly sophisticated regulatory system food it was never designed to correctly interpret. So the next time you finish something and think, why do I still feel hungry after all of that? I don't want you asking what's wrong with your appetite. I want you asking what was actually in what you just ate and whether your body ever really got the chance to recognize it as food at all, because you're not losing control of your hunger. Something removed the signals your hunger was always supposed to run on. So let's talk about where this shows up in places you'd least expect it, because this is the part that catches even health-conscious people completely off guard. If ultra-processed food only lived in the candy aisle or the chip aisle, this would be an easy problem to solve. You'd simply avoid those aisles. But that's not where the real damage is happening anymore. The real damage is happening in the health food aisle, in the products specifically marketed to people who are trying to do the right thing. Take the protein bar. You reach for it because it says protein in big letters on the front, because you're trying to eat better, because it feels like a smart choice compared to a candy bar sitting right next to it on the shelf. But turn it over. A lot of these bars are structurally closer to a candy bar than to an actual piece of food. Isolated proteins, sugar, alcohols, gums, and emulsifiers holding the whole thing together, engineered for a chewy texture and a 2-year shelf life. It has a health claim on the front and an industrial ingredient list on the back, and those two things are not telling you the same story. Or take plant-based meat alternatives. I want to be careful here, because the intention behind a lot of these products is genuinely good. Less reliance on animal agriculture, a smaller environmental footprint, options for people who've chosen not to eat meat. I'm not questioning the motivation. I'm questioning the assumption that plant-based automatically means healthy, because a lot of these products are, by definition, ultra-processed. Isolated pea protein, methyl cellulose, a dozen additives designed to mimic the texture and bleed of real meat. That doesn't make it evil. It just means the label plant-based got quietly repurposed as a health halo, when what it actually describes is the source of the ingredients, not how extensively they've been engineered. Then there's the entire category of natural snacks, the ones with earthy packaging, muted colors, a font that looks like it was designed by someone who cares deeply about sustainability, rice cakes with flavor coatings, veggie straws that contain more potato starch than actual vegetable, fruit snacks marketed to kids that share more in common, ingredient for ingredient, with candy than with fruit. None of this is accidental. Every one of these choices, the packaging, the language, the placement near the organic produce, is a deliberate design decision made by people who understand exactly how much trust the word natural still carries with an American consumer, and exactly how little that word is actually regulated to mean. Here's why this matters more than the obvious junk food sitting in the center aisles. When ultra-processed food is obviously ultra-processed, you get to make an informed choice. You know what you're doing. But when it's dressed up as the healthy option, specifically targeted at people who are actively trying to take care of themselves, it stops being a choice at all. It becomes a trap set for exactly the people who are paying the most attention. You did the responsible thing. You read protein. You saw plant-based. You saw natural. and the system exploited the very diligence that should have protected you. This is the part that I think deserves real anger, and I don't say that lightly. Marketing to someone's willingness to indulge is one thing. Marketing to someone's desire to be healthy and then handing them a product engineered the same way as the junk food they were trying to avoid is something else entirely. It takes the instinct to protect yourself and your family and turns it into the exact mechanism being used against you. So here's what I want you to start doing, starting today. Stop letting 3 words make your decisions for you. Natural, protein, plant-based. Those words tell you almost nothing about how processed something actually is. The only way to know is to turn the package around and look at the ingredient list itself, not the nutrition facts, the ingredients. If you don't recognize most of what's in there, if it reads like a chemistry set rather than a kitchen, that health claim on the front doesn't mean what you think it means, because the most dangerous ultra-processed food isn't the kind you already know to be suspicious of. It's the kind wearing the same values you have: health, wellness, doing right by your family, turned into packaging and sold right back to you. Now I want to ask you a question that I think most people have never actually asked, even though it's sitting right in front of them every time they read a reassuring headline about processed food. When a study comes out telling you that ultra-processed food isn't really that harmful, or that the science is still inconclusive, or that any individual ingredient people are worried about is perfectly safe in the amounts consumed, who funded that study? Because I promise you, in a remarkable number of cases, the answer is the same industry whose products were just cleared of wrongdoing. This isn't speculation. This is a documented, repeating pattern. Food and beverage companies have spent enormous sums funding nutrition research, sponsoring the professional associations that write dietary guidelines, and underwriting the very conferences where nutrition science gets discussed and disseminated. And here's the part that should genuinely concern you. Research funded by the food industry doesn't just occasionally lean favorable. Study after study, review after review has found that industry-funded nutrition research is dramatically more likely to reach conclusions favorable to the sponsor than independently funded research looking at the exact same questions. Not slightly more likely, dramatically more likely. That's not a coincidence. That's what happens when the people paying for the answer have a very specific answer they need. Think about how this actually works, because it's rarely as crude as a company simply lying about their own product. It's subtler than that, and that's what makes it so effective. It's a matter of which questions get asked in the first place, which comparisons get chosen, which confounding variables get controlled for, and which quietly don't. It's funding the review articles that shape how doctors and dietitians think about a topic long before any individual consumer ever sees a headline. By the time a reassuring study reaches you in a news article or a product's marketing, the framing has already been shaped upstream by people with a direct financial stake in what you conclude. And we've seen exactly where this leads before. We talked about it with sugar, with the industry-funded research decades ago that shifted blame onto fat and helped build an entire generation of low-fat products loaded with sugar instead. This is that same playbook running on ultra-processed food today. Fund the favorable studies, sponsor the professional guidelines, fund the conferences, quietly shape the questions being asked, long before the public ever hears the answer. It worked the first time. There has been no real incentive for it to stop, and every incentive for it to continue, because it remains to this day extraordinarily profitable. And here's what I want you to notice about the pattern, because it repeats itself with almost mechanical consistency. Genuine concern gets raised by independent researchers. The industry response is rarely to change the product. The response is to fund research that muddies the picture, to say the science isn't settled, to buy just enough doubt to keep the product on the shelf while the argument plays out in journals most people will never read. Meanwhile, the product keeps selling, keeps reaching kids, keeps sitting in the same healthy aisle we talked about a moment ago, while the debate about whether it's actually a problem drags on for years, sometimes decades, funded in large part by the very companies whose profits depend on the debate never fully resolving. I want to be careful here, because I'm not telling you to distrust all nutrition science. Most researchers in this field are honest people doing careful work, often on shoestring budgets that can't compete with industry funding. What I'm telling you is to ask a simple question before you let any single study change how you eat. Who paid for this, and what did they have riding on the outcome? That one question will do more to protect you from misleading nutrition headlines than almost anything else I could teach you today. Because here's the uncomfortable truth underneath all of it. The same food environment that engineered products to override your fullness signals has also, in many cases, funded the research telling you not to worry about it. That's not two separate problems. That's one industry, protecting one set of profits using two different tools. And once you see that clearly, you stop needing every study to convince you. You start trusting what your own body has been telling you all along. So let me bring this all the way home because I don't want you leaving here today feeling like you need to burn down your pantry and start over from scratch. That's not realistic, it's not sustainable, and honestly, it's not even necessary. What I want to give you instead is something much simpler and much more durable. A way of seeing food that you can actually carry with you into a grocery store, into your kitchen, into your kids' lunch boxes, starting tomorrow morning. The first shift is this. Stop starting with nutrition facts and start with ingredients. I know that sounds backwards because we've all been trained to look at calories, at grams of protein, at the numbers in that little box. But the numbers can lie to you in ways the ingredient list can't. A product can hit all the right numbers and still be built almost entirely from isolated starches, gums, and lab-formulated flavor compounds. So train your eye to go to the ingredient list first. Ask one simple question. Could I recognize most of what's in here if I saw it sitting on a counter? Flour, butter, eggs, vegetables, meat, spices. That's a kitchen. Modified cornstarch, maltodextrin, mono, and diglycerides. That's a factory. You don't need a chemistry degree to spot the difference. You just need to actually look. Second, prioritize whole foods, but don't treat this as an all-or-nothing rule because that mindset is exactly what causes people to give up in the first place. Nobody needs to eat perfectly. What moves the needle is the ratio, shifting your plate so that whole foods make up the majority of what you eat most days, not chasing some impossible standard where nothing ever comes from a package. Real food doesn't have to mean inconvenient food. Frozen vegetables are real food. Canned beans are real food. Plain yogurt with fruit you add yourself is real food. This isn't about purity. It's about tilting the balance back in your favor, meal by meal, without needing to overhaul your entire life overnight. Third, and this is the swap that will do more for you than almost anything else on this list. Start looking for the ultra-processed version of things you already eat every week and find the one ingredient list shorter alternative. You don't have to eliminate bread. Find a bread with 5 ingredients instead of 25. You don't have to give up yogurt. Buy the plain version and sweeten it yourself so you control what goes in instead of a food scientist controlling it for you. You don't have to stop snacking. Choose nuts, fruit, cheese, things that require no ingredient list at all because they simply are what they are. Small, specific swaps, repeated consistently, add up to something much bigger than any single dramatic diet change ever could. And I want you to notice something about everything I've just told you. None of it requires you to be rich. None of it requires you to have hours of free time to cook elaborate meals from scratch every single night. This isn't a luxury wellness routine. It's a shift in attention, learning to actually look at what you're buying instead of trusting a label that was specifically designed to earn your trust without deserving it. And I think that's really the heart of everything we've talked about today. This was never really a conversation about food. It was a conversation about attention, about who has been quietly directing yours and toward what and why. The engineering, the marketing, the funded research, the health halos on products that don't deserve them. All of it depends on one thing and one thing only. It depends on you not looking too closely. That's the entire business model. Not looking closely is what allows an entire food category to take over a plate, override a body's own signals, and get defended by science paid for by the very companies profiting from your not noticing. So here's what I'm asking of you. Starting with your very next trip to the grocery store, look closely, turn the package around, ask who benefits from you not asking questions. Because the moment you start looking closely at what's actually in front of you, you take back something that was quietly taken from an entire country, one convenient meal at a time. That's the food doctors have been trying to warn you about. Not one ingredient, not one villain, just an entire system built to work best when nobody's paying attention. Today, you're paying attention. Don't stop now. I want to start with a confession. Not from me, but from you. Somewhere in your kitchen right now, not the pantry you're suspicious of, not the junk food you already feel guilty about, but somewhere in the food you trust. There is something doctors have been trying to warn you about for years. And the reason it's still there, the reason it's still on your table tonight is that it doesn't look like a threat. It looks like breakfast. It looks like a snack you handed your kid on the way out the door. It looks like the healthy choice you made on purpose, standing in that aisle, trying to do right by your family. That's what makes this different from every other health scare you've heard about. This isn't hiding in the food you already avoid. It's hiding in the food you reach for specifically because you trust it. And that trust, quiet, automatic, built over years of clever packaging and reassuring language, is exactly what's being used against you. Doctors have a name for it now. Researchers have spent years mapping exactly how it was engineered, who funded the studies telling you not to worry, and why your own body's hunger signals no longer seem to work the way they used to. And once you see how deliberate this actually was, you will never look at your own kitchen the same way again. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly what this food is, why it was built this way, and more importantly, exactly how to take your plate and your family's health back into your own hands. This isn't about fear, it's about finally seeing clearly. Let's begin.